This is Simone Martini's Annunciation. Let's look at this to see how we can account for why it looks the way it looks. First of all, Simone Martini is a Siennese painter, just like Duccio, though he's a generation later. This was made for the church, for the main church of Siena, just like the Maestà altarpiece was, though the Maestà is the main altar, and this is for one of the side chapels, I guess. And as a side chapel, it's a little less important, and it can be a little less formal. The Maestà altarpiece, we look just a second, as Mary and child enthroned, and saints on either side. And it's not really telling a story, it's just the holy conversation between saints. An annunciation is a story where an event from the Bible, from the Gospels, Gabriel is telling Mary that she's going to have Jesus. This instance has two other saints on either side. It's in a very elaborate frame, gilt, and shaped kind of like a cathedral. This would be the nave, and these would be the aisles. And the nave and the first two aisles make the frame for the Annunciation story, separated with these spiral columns. And then these extra aisles contain the two saints to flank. Then there's all these other features. These are cusps and spires, all these things that a cathedral would have. So it's a big, elaborate production just for the carpenter to make. The story of the Annunciation is very common, and on your list there are several Annunciations, and on your midterm and your final, there will be opportunities to compare pictures, and I like to choose two pictures that have something in common, oftentimes the same subject. So if you were to compare one Annunciation with another Annunciation, you could, they both tell the same story, but whatever the difference is has something to do with where they were made, or who made them. So why does this look the way it looks? Well, it's Siennese, so it's not a production of a Florentine painter. You look at this shape of Mary here; it looks graceful and linear and flat. Looking at this saint on this left side, though, it has a little more volume here in the pleats and I guess kinks in the folds of the drapery. It looks a little. I guess a little more volumetric, kind of like a Giotto. Let's look at the Duccio. This is one generation later from Duccio. And this figure, say a standing saint, look at its drapery, look at the volume of drapery and all these others, and go back to Martini. This does actually look a little like Giotto, I guess, but it's not quite as large and chunky. The feet, look at the feet seem to be standing on the ground, as opposed to these feet, which are just sort of almost kind of dangling. This one seemed to be on the ground a little bit, but generally speaking, when you have figures that are not conceived as objects in space that much, they don't seem to have that much weight. Let's look at a close-up of the Annunciation. Another thing is that, let's go back to the full picture. The saints on either side are not depicted as if they're in the same space. The interior picture of the Annunciation has a surface that they're standing on, or they're kneeling and sitting on, and it looks like a marble slab, and it goes back a certain amount and stops. The saints are not in the same space because they're on a different level, something that seems to be going back in space in a different angle, as if they're seen from a different angle than the main scene. This is Duccio's Annunciation. and it's very different. I mean, it has Mary in a architectural space that looks 3D to a large extent. Gabriel seems to be stuck on top of this, not inside the actual architecture, but still, there's an attempt made to show them as objects in space. So why would, if this is an advancement, why wouldn't Simone Martini, who's even later, do the same sort of thing? There is no space. This is a gold ground in the background, and there's no indication that what sort of place that they're in. They're in this timeless gold ground space of the Middle Ages. One way to explain something like this is that for the Maestral altarpiece, this is the main picture, but on the back side there's lots of little pictures, and in little pictures in these paintings, an artist can be more forward-thinking, can put more innovations in. For the main picture, they can't. So in here, Mary seems to have more presence, more volume. She's sitting on a three-dimensional object. She's in a three-dimensional space. And for a big altarpiece, for the main picture, you have to be more conservative. You have to be more like the old style. There's some neat things about this that we'll see later in other paintings that are of Annunciations. I'm going to zoom in a bit. You can see the letters written. They're actually written in gesso, the same as the ground, and then gilt. The letters are the words that Gabriel is saying. He says, Hail Mary, full of grace. He has lilies, which are the symbol of Mary's purity, the vessel, that she's the vessel of Christ. All sorts of neat things. The drapery. Let's zoom out a little so you can see the cloth of Gabriel's cape, I guess, or cloak, is flowing in the wind as if Gabriel had just alighted. So the idea of somebody just alighting and saying something, it's a moment in time kind of thing, not a timeless thing that you would see in the Maestà. So you can get away with a little bit more action stuff. And also the weight of Gabriel and the cloth around Gabriel's body seem a little bit more naturalistic than Duccio would have it. Though Mary tends to be treated in a more conservative way, in any century that has innovations in it. Mary would be the last to receive those innovations. I wanted to also show an example. This is also by Simone Martini, just to show another example by the same artist of the same thing. This is Mary from the Annunciation. This is, I think, it's part of a diptych, so that the left side we're not seeing with Gabriel, but this is the Mary side. And because it's small and portable, you can introduce some new things, give it a little more naturalism, but it's very decorative. It is the same sort of thing that Duccio would have with the what do you call this? The trim on the hem on the edges of cloth being covered with this gold design, ribbon-like design, and it makes a nice pattern. Gold ground stamped. If you saw the video about how these panels are made, you see these are stamped and drawn in to create a pattern which defeats any illusion of space that they're in. It's a perfectly flat thing, so that the figure looks perfectly flat. But Simone had other tricks. This is Simone in a fresco, and when you see that this kind of thing is much different than his panel work, this has a whole lot of the innovations that Giotto had. In fact, it's even more crisp and naturalistic than, to some degree, than Giotto. I mean, there's this rendering of this, whatever you call it, tabernacle kind of thing with crocketed spires on either side. neat, imaginative building. These are Crockett's right there. With these arches, pointed arches with the circles, it's a very complex thing to draw in a three-dimensional space in perspective. And this is not a perspective picture. Hasn't been invented yet. So this is a completely imaginative thing, and it's very convincing. So Simone Martini was completely capable of all the advances that were going on at the time. The main work that we're looking at, this one, it just doesn't have them in it because of it's an altarpiece, and because it has Mary in it, and there's just certain things about this that kind of retrograde, I guess you could call it, or just conservative in style. I wanted to point out the lilies, or these flowers. They're kind of neat in that they seem to be pointed out in all directions. When you look at flowers like this in the context of this picture, and the fact that everything is flat and Byzantine, I guess you could call it, you wouldn't necessarily need all the flowers to be 3D like this. There are some going back and some going forward and left and right and at angles to indicate that he actually looked at some flowers. He didn't just make a symbol of flowers or some graphic image of flowers that you get from something made from the Middle Ages. This is a new feature, and I guess when it came to the flowers, he felt perfectly free to use that innovation, whereas he didn't feel the same with regard to, say, the volume of Mary and her cloak. Another aspect of Annunciations in general that is good to know about is that the story, when Gabriel comes to see Mary, he says a number of things and she responds in a number of ways. I think there are 5 different aspects to it that could be represented in an Annunciation. So the very beginning, when Gabriel says, "Hail Mary, full of grace," she responds by turning away, or a kind of she experiences disquiet, and then she thinks about it and she asks a question. Gabriel responds, and then at the end she's accepting. So this image is the first stage where she's experiencing the disquiet, and other images we'll see will be at another stage. So that's one way you can distinguish between the two, or between the 5. Actually, there's they're not all represented with the same frequency. All right, this is a picture I think I showed before of the aerial view of Siena. This is the Duomo. This is where the Simone Martini would altarpiece would be, and also the Maestà would be in here. You can see that the building itself was originally planned to be this big. This was going to be the nave, and that was just too ambitiously large to make, and so they just took the transept and turned that into the church itself. This is the Campo with its campanile, the bell tower, and this is its public building. It's like the city hall building, and I will show you what's in there. There is a fresco by the next artist, is Ambrosio Lorenzetti. There were differences, changes, I guess you could say, in the economy. The city was becoming more prosperous. That is, in the first half, I guess, of the 1300s, there was a increase in prosperity in the people. They had a government which was not a democratic government, but something where, I think it was an oligarchy, where a group of rich merchants and people who rose to the top in the economic scale were the rulers, and they ruled in such a way so as to make their businesses do well, which, as it turned out, made the whole place do well, because it required lots of good economic things to happen in order for them to prosper. So this is the room where the council met in this city hall, Palazzo Pubblico. It's called, it's a public palace. And they would be in here, and they would make their judgments, they would make their laws, and they would run the city. On the walls, they had commissioned from Ambrosio Lorenzetti these frescoes to remind them of what they're supposed to do. There's images of allegorical scenes that represent the effects of good government and bad government, and there's the virtues and the vices also represented. And we are going to focus on one of them, but before I show you that one, I'll show you, you can look them up and look at them in detail. These are the virtues and the vices, and I guess the council is represented here, and they want to remind that everyone that this is about justice. This is what the world would be if they were evil, and the kind of bad things that would happen. And since this is in disrepair, we'll look at the one that is in good repair, which is the effects of good government. It's a very long horizontal rectangle, so I'll show this is the first half, the left half, and then we'll go to the right half. You can see this is the wall divides them. The left half is an image of Siena, and it's quite convincing as far as the illusion of space. Siena is a very complex medieval city on a hill with lots of winding, very steep streets that are narrow. And there's lots of tall buildings that are at odd angles to one another. So it's not like you could easily represent it in any way that you could see it clearly. When you're in it, you're sort of like you're in a maze with very tall walls. So you can't really see the whole city. But Ambrosio Lorenzetti has, let me, 1 second here, there, make it a little smaller. So you see this up in the corner here? This is the Duomo. That's its dome and its tower, which are recognizable. That's part of the city. And everything else would be, I guess, equally recognizable to the folks there. Give you a look at the close-up. Lots of people of all different walks of life. This is the nobility riding horses. This is the inside of the city, this left half. Lots of things are going on. Commerce is going on. Festivals are going on. The book says that these are men dressed as women doing some sort of dance that is some sort of, celebratory dance. And each one has brightly colored and patterned dresses on. And, the artist has gone to some pains to show how they do it. Apparently, it's a line dance where everyone is holding hands in a circle, and I imagine that they intertwine with one another. Inside businesses where things is going, commerce is going on, things are buying, people are buying and selling stuff. Schools are happening, justice is happening. Look at this donkey or mule or whatever it is. It's not seen flat. It's seen as in a 3/4 view. This one is seen flat, but it's a very volumetric thing that he's holding. Lots of imagination is going on. Think where people are planning buildings over here. I think up here somewhere, people are building. So prosperity is being represented in lots of different ways, and just the variety, the decorations of buildings that they have. They're showing off their stuff. One thing to remember is when an artist is going to depict something like this, unlike in the Middle Ages when, is that a cat up there? Yeah, it's a cat. I hadn't noticed that before. In the Middle Ages, one characteristic of art was that the artist would look at previous versions of the same thing and copy it to some extent, maybe make some modifications to it, but it's all derived from some other work of art earlier, and generation after generation, the it would become flatter, more patterned, and farther removed from whatever it was that the original artist had actually looked at in the real world. This is a situation where an artist is, in this case, the artist didn't have anything to look at. There is no instance of this from the Middle Ages of someone making a large image of a town, any architectural rendering of this kind. If you had to go back to find something, it would actually be from Rome. Roman houses would have images like this on the wall, but it's nothing that anyone from Siena in the 1300s could have seen, because we can only see them now if it's because they were in Pompeii and they weren't discovered till much later. Look at the lighting. You know, he's consistent lighting. It's very true to life. I mean, he's actually gone out and looked and seen and represented something very complex as far as its three-dimensionality, and made it clear. These sheep look a little, or goats, I guess, look a little medieval. But that looked like a real dog. It's filled with, what do we call now, genre paintings, just things of everyday life. And there just wasn't a precedent for this. Now, when we look at the wall, this is the city wall, and it makes a kind of a zigzag here, and it's very, very skinny. That's not what you would call a naturalistic detail. But when I think about it, how else would he have done it? You know, if he wanted to make it a naturalistic, as he did the other buildings, how would he have done it? And I can't really think of a good solution either. So this is more of a medieval way of representing this wall. Going to the other side, you see the effects of good government in the countryside, and there's an allegorical figure up here. Let's zoom over. The figure of security, and security is holding a hanged man to show that security has taken care of all the bad guys, and now you can live in peace. Over here, this is the she-wolf with Romulus and Remus. This is the symbol of Rome, and this is representing the gate that you'd go out from Siena to go towards Rome. The nobility with falcons doing their stuff, they are happy. The peasants are happy doing their stuff. Man with a pig, people talking, people harvesting. I believe these are grapevines, taking their wares to market. It's a very imaginative picture, and as again, I can't stress enough the fact that it's unprecedented. I mean, that means that the artist had nothing else to look at, and he had to just make it up from whole cloth. It's a fascinating thing. We don't have another picture like it. There's not, as far as I know, another instance of someone representing good government and bad government anywhere else. So this is it's one of a kind. But we will have other things to compare it to in terms of landscapes and people in landscapes. The folks in the north that we'll look at shortly will do a similar sort of thing where they go out and describe in detail what nature looks like. And comparing the two, you can see that the folks in Italy here, or at least as this one guy,